Hey there, my name is Eric Dicaire, and this is Delve, the official management thought leadership podcast of McGill University. I'm Delve's managing editor, and in today's interview, we're doing it. We're talking about something every career-oriented person has wondered about at one point or another: job hopping. How long should I stay in a job? When will a prospective employer penalize me for switching jobs too often? How should I plan my career accordingly? Well, Professors Matissa Hollister and Xavier St-Denis looked into it. In a recent study, they measured the impact of job hopping on employability, and their findings dispel some myths around job hopping and give us some insights on how to build a steady and successful career. So, Matissa Hollister is a professor of Organisational Behaviour here at McGill University, and Xavier St-Denis is an associate professor at the Institut de recherche scientifique here in Montreal. We're delighted to have them here, and here's what they learned about job hopping. Let's delve into it. All right, so Matissa Hollister and Xavier St-Denis, thank you so much for joining the Delve Podcast. I'm excited to have you here.
It's our pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like an interesting piece of research that you worked on recently, just looking at like how employers think about job hopping. And I don't know, like there's just so many interesting findings in your work. And just before we jump into it, I just thought maybe a fun question to start us off would be just like, because we're talking about job length and how that affects like your employment prospects. I don't know, what's the longest either of you have been in a job? I'm curious to see what your experience has been like there.
Well, my longest is here at McGill. I've been here for 12 years.
What about you, Xavier?
The longest is my current job as well. It's been a little over 5 years.
So, okay. So you guys wouldn't qualify as job hoppers is what I'm understanding.
No.
What's the time frame to be considered someone who like hops between jobs quite a bit?
We set it at 2 years partially because I'd had some, based on our previous research, I was invited to a couple of panels and things, and or I'd talk to employers and they'd say, oh, those, usually it's a stereotype of sort of the millennials at the time, or I've lost track of what generation we're in now. They only stay for 2 years and then they leave, right? So they always said 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. So that's what we set as our definition in our study. We made what we called the job hopper, somebody who changed approximately every 2 years. We didn't make it exactly 2 years, but anywhere from sort of 20 months to 26 months, maybe 28 months. As the paper finally got published, I was trying to write, some things for press releases and that sort of thing. And so I looked on Reddit for discussions about, do employers care about job hoppers? Why would they care, et cetera? And there, people were defining job hoppers as people who left within less than a year. And that's actually an interesting thing to kind of add to our study, which was that a number of people said, oh, well, you do need to stick it out. You can't just quit quickly, otherwise it'll look bad. But as long as you stick it out for 2 years, and especially if you show that the moves make sense and kind of are a progression in your career, then you'll be okay. And our findings actually seem to counteract that advice, in that we did find for many of the jobs that even what we defined as job hopper, which turns out to be a very mild version, was punished.
Wow. That's nuts, because I feel like even in my career, I've heard a lot like, oh yeah, 2 years, you should move on. Like
right.
That's the most, but maybe that's just because of, I'm a younger person maybe. So like maybe in your 20s, you're supposed to be figuring stuff out. So it's recommended that you hop around, but yeah, that's super fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there is this, historically, and people have, even academics have written about this for a long time, there is this expected pattern that, mobility when you're young is something that is accepted, right? That you do need to find your footing and try a few things maybe in that sort of stuff. But the sort of traditional view is sort of once you hit 30, you should settle down and really look for that long-term job and focus on promotions inside the company. And a lot of our other research is suggesting that it's that settling down and kind of the ability to achieve a really long-term career that is disappearing. And so now advice is given, this is kind of internalized for younger generations, is that actually the only way to get ahead is you can't stay in one place. You have to look for new opportunities and move. And we really wanted to look at whether or not that advice might actually backfire.
And one thing we can mention about our study is that It's an experimental study where we focused on developing profiles of younger workers. So the profiles we had were fictitious workers who had been on the labor market for about 8 years, from college to their early 30s. And so that's, I think, the one interesting thing about the study is these are fictitious workers that are exactly that are supposed to have just worked in this kind of first decade of their career, where most people seem to think they should be moving around.
So why would employers care? Because I do wonder about that. Because if you're there for 2 years, you've done a lot of time, you're getting a lot of experience, a lot of time. I'm defining it as a lot of time, but I'm curious, what do they perceive on a resume when they see that someone's moved around, frequently like that?
This is great. You're giving us the sort of the generation, the millennial perspective of why.
Yeah,
why?
I'm going to be coming at this with
good.
a skeptical, maybe my own bias is showing here, but I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
There's a number of possible reasons, and one of the challenges of this particular study is that it's the one downside of the research method that we used, is that we can't get at the exact why. What the study was really aimed at was, are there penalties? How big are the penalties, et cetera? But we have lots of other information from explanations that people say, and it's a bit of a mix. And it's actually something that we have an interest in looking at in the future. So on the one hand, the most common thing that you hear people say is, anybody that I hire, it takes time to hire them. It takes time to get them up and running. And I spend a lot of resources training them. I want to get basically a return on my investment, if we want to take a very business perspective, right? And so somebody who, depending upon how much time and how much resources are required to get that person up to kind of top productivity, if you're constantly having to redo that, that has a cost to the company. So that's the most cited thing. And part of our motivation was that there was this, not only was this the sense that there's a new perspective from the job seeker on how the best strategy in the job market, but there's also an increasing number of people who are claiming that employers didn't care anymore, both because it was just now the new normal, so employers just had to accept it, but also that, in fact, I think some of the source of the new behaviors by workers is the fact that employers seem to be signaling that they don't care about long-term jobs because they seem to be more willing to fire people. So that was one of the reasons why we also wanted to look at it, is it really true that employers no longer care? So the answer seems to be they still do, despite this rhetoric, seem to care about it. I would say the other explanation I see commonly cited is it's seen as a negative sign on the character of the job applicant, right? That the job applicant is too greedy. In fact, I actually found reference to where the term job hopper came from, and it actually comes from World War II, and it was a cartoon drawn by Walt Disney. I found the cartoon. It's very cool. And it was sponsored by the job board because during World War II, there was a real shortage of workers because so many people were out fighting the war. And so they wanted to encourage people. They were worried that people were kind of strategically moving around and quitting, and they were causing chaos in the labor market and making wages go up and stuff. So they started an ad campaign saying sort of basically, essentially, you're being unpatriotic by being a job hopper and moving around. And so that's actually where the term came from. And it's a cartoon of a grasshopper moving around. And so I think, right, there's sort of, and it comes from that psychological contract that sort of a good worker is a loyal worker. And so the person who sort of, even if they're strategically moving, is sort of doing it for their own personal good and not good for the company, that there's also this potential that they're worried that the person will come and not only leave soon, but maybe never be a great team player, right? That they're too selfish or things like that. And that's another possible explanation that I think is going on there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's super fascinating. I didn't know that about the Disney piece. I'm going to have to go find that cartoon.
I know, it's super cool.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Well, okay, Xavier, maybe you can help us get in the weeds here a little bit.
So the key statistically significant difference we find in our study is between job hoppers and the other profiles, but specifically in the non-tech occupation. Specifically meaning that we were comparing people who, regardless of the industry they worked in, they were in a tech job. And so at the beginning we were talking about what counts as job hopping, and how different sectors may view what counts as job hopping as different. But here also, what our study shows is employers seem to perceive job hopping differently depending on who's the job hopper. So depending on the context, depending on the occupation. What
we did was we created fake resumes for these 5 different occupations: the HR, marketing, finance, IT support, which is kind of more of a corporate job type of position, and then a software tester, which was our tech occupation. And the resumes looked 99% identical in terms of the positions that the person had over these 8 years. They had these 4 jobs where each job was kind of an increasing sense of responsibility. They had all the same skills, everything. And the only thing that varied was in those 4 positions that person had, were those 4 positions internal promotions or external moves. So they were the exact same job description on the resume, but for the job hopper, each of the 4 positions was a different employer. For the moderate, it was 2 and 4 years with a promotion within each. And then we had what we called the stable, which was the person that spent the whole 8 years in one job. We sent those resumes out to real job openings, only ever sort of one to any given employer to really minimize the disruption to them. And then we saw who got a callback from the employer. The moderate mobility kind of overall kind of had the best track record. And the stable resumes, some of it is kind of averaging up all the results, because there were certain jobs where the stable resumes were preferred, and others where it was equal to the moderate, and then a few where it was punished. And part of the view of the people who'd been at 8 years is, maybe I'm now going to get in trouble, which I very probably would be, right? I've worked now for 12 years at McGill. If I applied somewhere else, they might sort of say, is she dynamic enough? Is she going to be able to adapt to a new situation? So I think at one point we even had this conversation in our research team of, maybe we should emphasize that the takeaway is, if you want to be safe, just have a moderate level of mobility, which I think is true, as sort of a universal thing, that there's risks at both ends. But I think as we sort of hinted, there were these differences by occupation. So I think an even better takeaway is understand what the norms are and the expectations are for your particular occupation, because chances are that your occupation might actually swing a little bit more in favor of stability or more in favor of dynamic. That might do even better than just sticking with the moderate. But it's true, if you're going to go across lots of different types of jobs or industries, the message does seem to be that in general, you're not going to be majorly punished for moves that are sort of 4 years apart. It's really that kind of shorter term that can get you in trouble for some jobs, or staying too long that can get you in trouble for other jobs.
Yeah, so I guess because you could have a string of bad luck where you've just, every single employer you've had has just laid you off, or, especially, I don't know, in some industries, like if you're a coder right now,
right.
It's probably hard to lock down a permanent position.
Yeah.
But you did say that tech occupations were less punished. So maybe that's why that's a more volatile kind of space. So there's more sympathy for that kind of thing.
And so that's where this interesting twist came in. So, for a long time, even in the academic research, when people have looked at this move towards more dynamic career patterns, tech jobs have always been sort of highlighted as like, this is where the pattern's emerging. There's some famous studies back into the 90s where they looked at sort of, there's this new emerging pattern of Silicon Valley where everyone just moves around, and it's not just beneficial for the workers, but actually beneficial for the employers. It's exchange of creative ideas, maybe more tech jobs. And there's other occupations that are like this that are more project-based, right? Where you sort of finish the project and you have these concrete skills, you can move somewhere else. So we purposely put that into the design. But frankly, especially because this classic study of job hopping happened in Silicon Valley and really emphasized kind of that it emphasized that it was like a whole different way to view the world, not just by the workers, but by the employers as well, being open and embracing the mobility rather than not. We really expected that, yes, tech jobs would be different, but we thought it would be tech employers, the tech industry that would be different, and that the kind of non-tech would not be different. And in much of the previous literature, those two get conflated because they often look at software engineers in software companies. That's both the industry and the occupation. But obviously, software engineers work in banks. And also, obviously, tech companies hire non-tech employers. They have an HR department. And so that was built into our design, was to look at those two separately. And so for every job opening, we coded the industry of the employer, and we're able to discern between tech employers and non-tech employers. And that's, I think, one of our most interesting findings. Yes, we did find that that employers, when hiring for that software tester position, were much more tolerant of job hoppers. They didn't punish them, and in fact, they punished the stable. What was surprising is that occurred across both tech and non-tech industries. So when a bank is hiring a software tester, they are also more tolerant. So it's something about the job, not the employer. And even more surprising, although this is sort of a little bit sort of reading into the tea leaves because we're getting down to smaller samples where the pattern was there, but we don't know that it's statistically significant. But when we looked at the tech employers by themselves, yes, they were strongly willing to allow. Actually, they were somewhat less strongly embracing job hoppers. Interestingly, it was almost like there's a stereotype of software. So it was actually the non-tech employers who were really happy about job hoppers. The tech employers, when hiring software, didn't really care between the hopper and moderate. They did punish the stable. But then, interestingly, when they hired for HR, marketing, finance, et cetera, they actually really favored the stable resume. Even more in the other industries, it was more the moderate that, as you had noted, came out, but they really wanted stable people. And we don't know why. Nicole, our other co-author, her theory was sort of almost, if your core employees are so mobile, maybe you really you need somebody to kind of hold down the ship and kind of give continuity. And so they really wanted stable people. It's not really clear. But that was kind of an interesting side finding that we don't, and like I said, maybe reading a little too much into it.
It's interesting. Yeah. Because I wonder too, if like, there's this feeling that software work is the same no matter where you are. I see this sometimes just in my limited experience in the journalism industry, these jobs are very structured. The skills are kind of the same wherever you go. Maybe the nuances are different. The tech you're working with is different. The colleagues, the offices, that kind of thing, and the processes. But the skills are kind of you can carry them with you from place to place. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, we're both sociologists by training, and sociology really has a big belief in kind of occupational norms that each job, career, occupation comes up with its own ideas of sort of how one should progress through it. So the occupation findings were not that surprising to us, but I do think when you think about the kind of how do you deal with job hoppers and such, I think that the thing that did surprise me, partially because of that classic study of Silicon Valley, is it really emphasized how the organization had to change its practices and how it viewed both kind of organizational culture, but I would imagine also, because I'm more of an HR person, right? It's HR practices. And so it's a little bit surprising to me that it suggests that companies, both the tech and non-tech companies, are now having kind of systems. I guess it's not super surprising, but they're applying very different standards for different types of jobs that they're hiring. And so they have to kind of make a decision of what they now have to become knowledgeable of those occupation specific things of what looks good for this particular job versus that particular job. And they're making decisions rather than just having, because there is this sense that there's companies that have a philosophy, oh, we're a stable company. And there's other companies that have this philosophy that we're a dynamic company. And we didn't look at specific companies, right? But the results seem to imply that at least at the industry level, that's not 100% true.
Yeah. And I think that's something I kind of thought about a little bit after we worked on the study, but more and more, a lot of companies, especially the bigger ones, a big number of companies are going to use recruiters for hiring. And so some of these recruiters kind of specialize in certain types of occupations or industries. And so it's possible that the norms around, hiring, being more favorable to job hoppers for tech occupations is related to this kind of recruiter ecosystem. Every company is not working kind of like in isolation, making those hiring decisions. And another thing we started to think about as well is the role of applicant tracking systems. So the automated resume screening systems, where this is kind of more of a black box, how the algorithms are detecting or not job hopping. And so we were kind of wondering if some employers would be using these systems, and if the systems would pick up employer changes as much as a human. That's something we haven't gotten to yet,
No.
I think, but
although you just gave me an idea, actually.
But one thing we hope to be we hope we can do at some point is kind of replicate some kind of similar experiment, but directly feeding in our fictitious resumes to automated resume screening tools to see what comes up, and if there's a difference between when a human makes a decision versus when a machine or an AI is making the decision.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's super fascinating, and I feel like we could keep going, but maybe that's a good place to end. So I think Matissa Hollister, Xavier St-Denis, thank you so much. This is super fascinating, and we should do a follow-up. We should talk about AI as it continues to touch like all these spaces. Like, I think there's a lot to unpack there. But thank you so much for your insights today.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, and that is today's interview. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure to leave us a rating in your podcast player because it'll really help us out. And thank you to Professors Matissa Hollister and Xavier St-Denis for sharing their insights with us today. If you want to read their paper, you'll find a link in the show notes to this episode. So McGill Delve is the official thought leadership platform of the Des Hotels Faculty of Management at McGill University. My name's Eric Dicaire. I'm Delve's managing editor, and I was your host today. I also produced and edited this episode. Professor Saku Mantra is Delve's editor-in-chief, and he created all of our original music. Do you have feedback about the show? Be sure to send us an email at delve@mcgill.ca. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.